So I'm Tim Gremore. You can connect with me on Twitter or X or LinkedIn. I almost always do use my first name, last name as a handle. So feel free to reach out and find me there. I'd love to chat. So you can see I've got a couple photos here of my lovely wife and our 5 kids, some fond memories that we've had recently. And then I work with Headway. Headway's design, product strategy, and development shop. We work with a variety of clients across different verticals, team of about 35, and clients early, young, old, big, small. We've had quite a variety of experiences, and so love to chat. If you ever want to get to know more about agency work or what we do, be happy to discuss. So that's me. So let me get started though with what we're here to talk about. I'm going to tell our story of Birdseye. So how we built Birdseye initially, some of the problems and challenges that we ran into, and then some of the lessons learned along the way. So let me give a little bit of context, some history. As if you've worked as a consultant and maybe even with product companies, for us, we found ourselves integrating with a variety of different third-party project management tools. And I've got a few listed here, from Trello to Notion to Asana. And what happens is you get things assigned to yourself across different third parties, and it becomes kind of challenging to aggregate that information, to plan your day, because you're checking those different applications and getting notifications and pings, and right. So it's kind of noisy and it's inefficient. And so we wanted to bring those third parties into one location and to be able to then provide some UI to help organize those tasks, to plan your day or your week accordingly. All right. So that was the problem that we solved, or that we set out to solve. Started with a proof of concept on a plane ride home. Initially, we had built a Rails application that would synchronously talk to Trello, read and write back and forth to Trello, and it worked, right? It was fine, but we knew that this was not something that was going to scale. So the proof of concept served its purpose, and then we decided let's take it a little bit further. And in the fall of 2018, we had a team week. We were all together Monday through Friday, and one of the things that we spent our time on was building a more full-fledged prototype of Birdseye. And we decided, hey, let's use React, let's use Phoenix. We wanted to use React because we wanted to build some engaging UI. We wanted to use Phoenix because we knew that we had a whole bunch of third parties we're integrating with, and just a lot of different work happening asynchronously. And so that was our reasoning at the time. Still makes sense today, but as you'll see, there were some challenges that we didn't anticipate with that approach. All right, so just let me level set a little bit further on what Birdseye did. This is not Birdseye. This is just a representation of Birdseye. But to further illustrate what it does is you get an inbox on your left. Tasks that get assigned to you end up in your inbox. You've got 7 columns to the right of your inbox, and each of those columns represents a day in the future. Idea is that you would drag your tasks from your inbox to one of those days, and that would indicate the day that you plan on working on that given task. As you mark things done, they end up at the bottom of your today column as complete. And as you edit tasks, they sync both ways, right? So we're right back to your third party as you make changes to your task in Birdseye and vice versa. And then last but not least, as days roll over, today becomes tomorrow, tomorrow becomes today. Anything you didn't complete today just stays in your today column, so you don't lose sight of what you have to get done, right? So that was the idea, that was the concept, and again, we set out to achieve that starting in 2018. All right, so the lessons learned. Here's the 4 things that I'm hoping to touch on today. Starting with identify the problem. So I want to make sure that do my best to clarify what the challenges that we solved, right? Team dynamics. Anytime you're going to switch from something known, something like React, something very well supported, as vast as the React ecosystem is, if you're going to propose something completely different, how are you going to do that in a way that's not going to alienate your team, right? Challenge your team, or end up being a wrong decision, right? So talk a little bit about how we navigated that. After we made the switch to Liveview, there were some unexpected wins. One of those was testing. So I'll talk a little bit about the advantages in testing that we experienced. And then future readiness. So how's Liveview better preparing us for future UI UX? This is nuanced, so I'll do my best to get into that. But I do think, in my opinion, there is some future readiness that we've gained by adopting Liveview that we otherwise would be fighting in the React SPA world. So, all right, so let's start with identifying the problem. All right, so let me just call out, these are the main ingredients, the main libraries amidst a long list of node modules that we started with serving as the backbone of our Birdseye React SPA. If you're not familiar, I'll just run through these real quickly. Apollo client is our GraphQL client, helped manage data client side, cache data client side. Material UI gave us user interaction and appearance. Formic gave us any input that we were taking in from users and lifecycle events around that form data. React Beautiful D&D gave us drag and drop, not just drag and drop, but also sorting and scrolling within the viewport. Moment.js for just basic date-time calculations. Last but not least, React Router for client-side routing and all of that under the banner of React. So those are the 6 main ingredients that went into our React SPA. And then as you might expect, this was the Phoenix backend, Ecto, Absinthe, all under the banner of Phoenix. And so that's what we set out to use. That's how we constructed our first more full-featured prototype of Birdseye. And once we had shipped it, we got some initial feedback, and that feedback was a little mixed. So this might be a little bit hard to read, but I just grabbed a few different clippings from our Slack history. Pretty entertaining if you haven't dug into your Slack history from 4 or 5 years ago. There's likely some fun tidbits some fun memories that'll come up. What these are representing is Andrew's pointing out some issues in the app that we developers didn't realize. And the issues that he's describing are things like, hey, I'm dragging a card from inbox to today, and it initially snaps back into today, and then it ends up it snaps back to the inbox, and then it ends up in today the way that I intended it to be, or I sorted and things just bounced back and forth in a way that was unexpected. Or like the most egregious would be, hey, my browser locked up. Became unresponsive, right? So there's these issues that aren't keeping him or anybody within the Headway team from using the app, but they were a nuisance to say the least, and that's something that we were comfortable sharing with the public because, well, it was buggy. And we didn't know initially we didn't realize, the development team, we didn't realize what was causing this because we're not experiencing the things that Andrew's reporting. Well, it didn't take too long before we realized he was just dealing with a greater quantity of tasks. So if we had been using 100 or 200 tasks in our testing and QA, he was using more like 500 tasks. And he wasn't using, that's actually what was coming in from his third parties. And so, all right, so then we had to think bigger. We had to think about performance much sooner than we ever expected to in the development of the app. So let me share, let's see here. Let me share what the experience was like with, this is the React version of the app at the time. There's 500 tasks, I think, is what I loaded up in here. And it's okay as I move around. You can see things are all right. But as soon as I drop and go to grab another task, you can immediately see how it's struggling to keep up to my interaction. And that's just with 500 tasks, right? So we weren't exactly sure what a realistic number is, but we knew that if our first official customer was having issues, it needed to be more than 500. So we thought, let's raise our target to something more like 2,000 as our benchmark and see what we can do to eke out enough performance from the React SPA to accommodate that many tasks. And so we did that. That was our new benchmark. We tried trimming our our graph queries so they're as lean as they could be. We tried rearranging state in the React app so it was more optimal for rendering. We tried changing how Material UI was initialized, how our theming was being set up. We tried like every drag and drop library under the sun, right? We just were churning through changes, and each change brought about some improvement, but not enough to accommodate 2,000 tasks. So we churned on that for quite a while. And when I say quite a while, just also to provide a little bit of context, as we're building Birdseye, this is happening during investment time. So, at the time, maybe there was 15 developers, say, 12 developers, and a couple hours a week here and there, people contributing to it, or perhaps during client assignments, somebody would have a couple week window of time where they would be dedicated Birdseye. So we're not only struggling to solve the problem, but we're also dealing with unexpected time allocation and availability from one another. And it just wasn't going anywhere, right? We're just not solving it, even though people are still using it and relying on it for work. So all that to say, what exactly is the problem that we solved? The best way, the most concise way that I can describe it is we solved a problem of complexity. So we were living in a cloud of abstractions, right? Like there was complexity that came with this choice to make a React SPA that we didn't recognize at the time, but we started to feel. So let me just, this very overly simplistic lifecycle diagram that I put together, I hope helps drive home the point of the complexity involved in building a React app, right? So you've got your React router, your client-side router is being initialized. Drag and drop is being initialized. Material UI is being initialized. Maybe the most work of all of the initialization, the buildup of the app, is in Apollo client because you're reading from cache, fetching over the network anything that may not be in cache. Once that's happening, also while React is trying to render, React is going to render perhaps a child component and a grandchild is going to request yet more data from Apollo, leading to more fetching, leading to more re-rendering. Eventually your app is going to render so that you can begin to interact with it. Not on here is, I didn't represent the fact that you've got subscriptions happening, so data is coming in at any point in time that's being assigned to you in third parties. And so there's this complexity. That's the best way that I can describe it. And all right, so we churned on trying to solve our performance problems. Just couldn't quite crack that nut. We couldn't quite solve that issue. And so we started to learn of Liveview. Again, this would have been 2020, roughly, where we decided, okay, let's try something else. Like, we just can't continue to do this. And so started to talk with a couple teammates about trying to spike on an implementation in Liveview. And so what was the reaction? Like, thankfully it wasn't, I don't believe you, right? It wasn't like, oh, get out of here with that. That's not actually gonna solve it. There was curiosity, right? There's hesitation from myself included. Everybody wanted to know, like, would Liveview actually solve the issue? If we're gonna learn Liveview, is that something we're gonna use outside of Birdseye, or is this just like do the thing and then we still live with everything that we've known, right, in React, and we continue to build UI with React? Is the JS community gonna leave us behind if we step outside of that and give our attention to something else for like a month? Are we gonna go back to JS and completely be lost, right? So these are the questions that are kind of ringing in folks' minds, but still a willingness to explore Liveview. So we tried to set out with building a spike with three clear goals. So one I already called out, want to make sure that we can actually render and support 2,000 tasks. We wanted to assess the developer experience. Like, is it good? Is it something not only good that we enjoy, but would we recommend it to others? And then try to evaluate like how much work is going to be involved in implementing the design specification that we had already built out in React with Material UI, how much is it going to take to redo that using HTML and CSS and Tailwind ultimately. So those are the three things we want to evaluate in the spike. And then here's what we use to revamp our app. These three primary ingredients. So the only change there's two changes from the prior slide. Sortable.js to support the drag and drop and sorting and scrolling that we need in the UI. And then Liveview, obviously, and at this point it was version 0.13. And then here's the reaction that we got. Andrew and I, different Andrew, he and I were spiking on this after a couple days. These are a couple clippings from our Slack thread, again, saying, hey, I'm amazed, like this is just working. It's incredibly fast. Liveview was as advertised, essentially, right? And so at this point, we felt quite good about what we had done in terms of spiking on a Liveview implementation of Birdseye. We felt good about it to the point where we need to pause our React development, pause on that churn, and invest our energies into building out a full-fledged version of Birdseye in Liveview. So, all right, so these snippets are, you can see, from the end of July 2020. By October, say the middle of October, I don't remember the exact date, but at some point in October, we had shipped our Liveview implementation and abandoned our React version of Birdseye. So felt pretty good, like pretty good testimony to the speed with which you can develop UI, interactive UI, performant UI, given that was about a 2.5 month window of time on something that has only gotten, way, way better even since 2020. So. All right, so just a couple other points on how to support your teammates, right? What are the concerns? How did folks react to this change to an unknown technology? We really wanted to limit the change, make sure we had something measurable so that folks could evaluate for themselves and have actual data, some actual points that they can use to help justify the change. We felt good about the developer experience. Like the three goals that we set out, I guess long and short, those three goals that we set out really we felt that we had achieved, and everybody on the team agreed that this was the right decision. So, all right. So some of the benefits, some of the wins that we experienced along the way in making this switch. So just a very simplistic graphic, right, illustrating that in the React SPA version, we had two different test suites that we were maintaining. We've got the React test suite, we've got Phoenix test suite. And if you just took something simple like a password reset as a feature, try to call out some of the main things that you're looking to test. And this would exist, this steps 1 through 4, right? This is client side in the React test suite. And so to test a password reset, I'd be looking to make sure that the UI is properly handling loading states. I'd be looking to make sure that the UI is updating once the data is available and rendering as expected. I'd want to check different error states if there's, and in this case, user input. And probably the most challenging part of all that is mocking Apollo client so that you can actually run the assertions and the test scenarios that 1, 2, and 3 are calling for. And so there's a lot of work involved in that. And if we contrast that with what that same feature might look like tested in Liveview, it's kind of night and day. This one test is giving us everything I just described and then some. You've got initially rendering a specific route. So right off the very first line of the test, we're doing a couple things. Asserting that the route exists and is correct. We're asserting then that we're getting back expected copy. The next couple assertions are checking to make sure that as we enter invalid input in the form that we're getting back expected error messages. Finally, we're checking that once the form has valid input that we get back an expected route, an expected redirect. And then even the very last assertion, checking to see that did the user get the confirmation message that we intended through toast message. So this runs in like the blink of an eye. Whereas having two separate test suites, you're doing a lot more work to get the tests written, you're waiting a lot longer for them to complete. And when you deploy this to CI, you have now two different configurations to get both those test suites to run in CI. So you're doubling your work and time when you really don't need to. You really don't need to. So now, can I test everything with Liveview? No. Could I test everything with React Testing Library and Jest? Well, no. Obviously there's a couple options worth calling out if you need to get to full end-to-end testing in a way that you just aren't comfortable given your tool set. So it's worth checking out Playwright or Cypress if you haven't. We've lately been enjoying Playwright quite a bit. So there's certainly some additional testing tools that you can layer on top of what you get with Phoenix and Liveview, or React for that matter. But just, I guess one of my main points that I want to call out is when you're testing something in Liveview, be very precise in what it is that you're actually testing, right? So because you're able to communicate with a process, a simple everyday process in Elixir, you're sending messages to it and you're asserting the response that you get back. You don't need to mock anything. That's the same thing that's happening when you're interacting with the Liveview in browser, right? So you just be very specific, like, do I need to drive this test with something like Playwright? Well, maybe not, because Liveview itself is testing some of that. Morphdom is testing some of that. I don't need to test those layers of this application necessarily. So just try to think real carefully, like, what is it that I'm actually testing? And then likely you can avoid complexity by just using your existing tool set with and that being Liveview and Phoenix. Okay, so how is Liveview better preparing us for future UI UX? So this is maybe a little bit controversial. I want to be careful with this because nothing that I've listed here or that I'll describe, it's not that you can't achieve this or use these features in a React SPA or any front-end framework for that matter. The point though that I want to make is that in my experience, Liveview keeps me closer to these features, to modern CSS and HTML, modern capabilities in the browser, than what I had experienced when building with React or any front-end framework for that matter. So when I would choose to use React, I'm choosing to use, again, a collection of abstractions. And so I'm somewhat beholden to what the author of those libraries are choosing, how they choose to do something like a view transition, for example. They may or may not use what the browser and CSS is going to give me natively. And so because I'm choosing to use those abstractions, I'm really just losing sight of what's happening in the browser community. I'm losing sight of what the evolution of CSS, how that specification is improving and growing, and it's really been improving and growing a lot. Like, there's a lot of excitement. If you haven't looked at the latest in CSS, check it out. I mean, these are just a few logical properties, pretty exciting, especially if you've got any internationalization that you're doing, left to right, right to left language. Grid display, so grids have obviously been around, but subgrids are a thing. I didn't know this, but they are a thing. Container queries and units are super useful. View transitions for interaction. CSS layers to help organize your specificity within your CSS library. And then expanded colors, so a whole new layer of colors are not yet available, but it sounds like it'll be coming soon, where more vibrant, richer colors will be available just at that in the browser using a different color spec. And so I would argue that something like Liveview, not Liveview itself, but something like Liveview gets me closer to the browser and CSS in a way that better prepares me for future UI and UX. And I would add Tailwind to that because in my mind, Tailwind is very close. It's like one small step removed from just writing your own raw CSS. So All right, so summary. So let me just recap a couple of these highlights. So let me encourage you, don't overcomplicate your UI. Be careful when you reach for something, a front-end framework. We were not at the time. We reached for React because we wanted engaging UI, right? Totally legitimate reason. But be a little more specific, like what is it that you are trying to achieve, and can you achieve it with something like Liveview? Just know that you can be productive building UI with Liveview. You don't need to reach for a full-blown UI framework like React. You don't need to reach for Material UI necessarily. You can be productive and build the same level of engagement with HTML, CSS, and then Tailwind as just a collection of utilities and helpers to get you there. And then simplify your test suite. So make sure that you're leveraging what you already have available to you in your stack. Be precise when you're testing. Be precise in what exactly it is that you're testing, and then only after you've identified that would you want to reach for something like Cypress, some end-to-end testing, and expand your test suite. So, all right, so there's a couple points, and then just let me close here with a couple things. One of our earliest adopters in digging in Slack, Old Abe, he likes to say that Birdseye has made his to-do list feel less overwhelming and way more achievable. So we appreciate Jacob for bringing that up and quoting Abraham Lincoln. And so if you're interested in checking out what Birdseye looks like, you can find us at usebirdseye.com. And then last but not least, this is sort of completely unrelated to the React Liveview discussion. Asana's API has been very challenging to work with. It's evolved since we started writing Birdseye, so that was one of the challenges. We wanted to abstract some of that code out and put it into a library so that others might be able to use it. You can see that library at Asana-EX. It's not a full wrapper around Asana's API. It's very narrow in what it's trying to do right now, but it might be of use to you if you have to bump into interacting with Asana's API. We didn't find anything online an existing library to do that for us, so we started to pull it out after writing our own. And that is it. Thank you all.